Tuesday. It is Tuesday. Let's see here. Tuesday. Sorry about that. I had a message came down and covered up my screen. Tuesday, yesterday, we started talking about the straight line from where the load exists to where you want to transfer that load to someplace. And I use that to illustrate the fact that when you're building a timber frame construction of any kind, you're transferring the weight from the roof, or you're transferring the weight from the second story, or from the mezzanine, or whatever it is that you have here. You're transferring that down to the foundation. And you want to take the straightest line that's possible. It's not always possible to take an incredibly straight line. Sometimes that line gets zigzagged for whatever reasons. There are reasons that we don't really need to go into, because that's more of a construction issue. But the point was this, that we've all had a tremendous load the last 6, 8, we're now 9 months. We've had this big load that has happened since the beginning of the year. Good morning, Don. And we need to transfer that someplace. It's got to, that weight, if we allow the weight to stay unsupported, what happens is it crushes. We've all seen these pictures of buildings with the roof that collapses because it had a big, heavy snow weight on top of it, or something to that effect. And so this is all about transferring that heavy load to the place that is intended to handle that load. So yesterday I used that as an illustration for your foundation, the place that's intended to hold the load, the one that's supposed to carry the weight, are your core values. It is the thing that makes you who you are. And when you go through a time like we've been going through lately, what you need to do is transfer that weight to those foundational issues. Now, as I think about this, and as I mull this over in my mind, and as I've looked back at the last, this whole thing started about the 1st of March, so we're in month 7, I think. But as I think about this, and I look back over that time, I see how the values have either supported the weight, those core values have either supported the weight, or they've been in clash with it. And sometimes what has to happen is for that foundation to rise up and support. So I'm going to give you what works for me. And I'm just going to share with you what 3 of those values are for me, and how those 3 values have been my foundation through this time. Those 3 values, even though at times they were at odds with other people, my 3 values are these. Number one, and I think this is a part of being an old hippie, but number 1, my most important value is freedom. It's freedom. It's all, for me, life is about being free to make good choices or bad choices. It's about being able to succeed or to fail. And even the ability to fail is a tremendous freedom, because in the failure comes opportunity. Failure can become a stepping stone. Failure can become the next step. It can become that launching point. It can become, I was writing something for somebody yesterday, it becomes the reboot. It's now I recognize what was wrong, and we can move from here. So freedom becomes my number 1 most important value, and it's the first thing that goes through my head. Jesus said, "You'll know the truth, and the truth will make you free." And so I always see how valuable truth is. How valuable freedom is. Threw that other statement in there. How valuable freedom is. Had a brief Joe Biden moment there where I got confused. Sorry about that. Freedom is that value. And so when I saw things happening in this world that value came in conflict with lockdowns, the word lockdown implies that you've lost freedom, right? I mean, it by its very nature implies that you've lost freedom. So I had a real problem with that. And I spoke about having a real problem with that. And I was very open about it because, and I was very criticized for it. That's okay. I don't mind the criticism. I really don't mind the criticism. But what I did mind was the restriction of freedom, because freedom is a very, very important core value to me. Then I had to take that. I knew somewhere that was going to come from, Don. Then I had to take that value of freedom and I had to balance it with something. And the interesting thing that I find is that your core values will always be matched with something that helps make them work better when you have more than one. Okay. So my core value of freedom, my number one, my first foremost, the very first thing that goes through my head is that how does that impact freedom? It's always going to be that. But the second thing, the second value, the second core value that came into play as this load gets transferred to the foundation, and this is going to be important in business, it's important in everything that you do, is transferring the weight of what's going on down to a foundation. So my first one was freedom, and yours doesn't have to be free. I'm not saying it has to be. What I'm saying is it was for me. It was the first thing that went through my head. How's this going to impact that value of freedom? The second one is equity. Equity. I want things to be equitable. I want things to be fair. So if taking, remember the 15 days to flatten the curve, if taking 15 days and locking down was going to make things better for other people, or it was going to reduce the weight load at the hospitals, or if it was going to accomplish the purposes for which we were sold that it would, then I could do that because that's equitable. It's the right and fair and just thing to do. Equity includes all of those words I just mentioned, right, fair, equitable. Those are all included in that statement. I could do that because I balanced the freedom, my freedom, with my responsibility to be equitable and to be fair in my treatment, my process of other people. That's important in business. It's important. I frequently will say to myself, well, I want to take this evening off. Yesterday, I got to 4:00 yesterday afternoon. It's like, my day's just about over. And I got 4 messages within 20 minutes. And I decided to set aside my freedom and do the thing that was right for the 4 people who sent me the message. That's kind of important that you do that. Okay. But you balance those things out, even when it's in business or whatever the state of life that you're looking at, that load has to be transferred to a value. And when you let the values support the load, it's amazing what happens in your life, in your relationships, in your business, in everything that you do. The third value, and this one's a little odd when you look at it from a value standpoint, but for me, it is in fact a value, and it's a very important value, and that is simplicity. Simplicity. Simplicity for me is a value. Simplicity means that you make things, as Einstein said, as simple as possible, but not simpler. That you maintain the integrity of the thing for what it is, whatever that is. I mean that literally across the board. My area is training people on how to use software, training people on how to market using software, training people on, in that arena. But there is a complexity that's natural in that environment. Well, how do we make it as simple without removing from it the things that are necessary? So simplicity becomes important. So as I looked at the situation that we've been going through, one of the things I could take away from that is that the lockdown allowed me to be simpler. It did. It allowed me to be simpler. The one thing that it did do, though, was it took away from me the ability to go to the grocery store every day, which was kind of something that's been important to me for a long, long time. I've talked about that in another video. But it did bring me back to those simpler things in life. And sometimes my life gets too complicated, and so does yours. And sometimes the complexity of things is just too much, and it can be overwhelming. Talking with a bunch of kids the other day, and the word that came up the most was the word overwhelm. Let's get back to simplicity. Let's make things as simple as they possibly can be, but not simpler. Let's do that for the kids. Let's do it for the people that are around us. Um, let's make sure that in the process of whatever it is that we go through and whatever the future holds, and the future is going to hold some good things, I can promise you that. It will, always does. Because remember, one of the freedoms is the freedom to fail. Well, right now we've had some failure that's been thrust on us. And we will get past that. When we get past it, when we get to the other side, things will be better. They always are. Things go in a V. They always happen that way. When you have an economy crash, it always bounces back up almost at the same rate, and usually typically at the same rate, and oftentimes with the same intensity that it went down, it goes back up. Those are just normal things, and you find that when you have a value of the truth, you'll get the chance to see those kinds of things. But what I wanted to share with you today was how important it is that you have something and you're able to articulate it. You're able to think on that. When you're driving down the road, you're able to think on it. When you're sitting in a recliner, you're able to think about it. Whatever it is that you're doing, when you take a break, when you have lunch, when you're eating supper, when you're visiting with your wife, you're able to think about those things that are core values for you. And you transfer the load to those core values because that foundation's intended to carry the load. Thank you for joining me on this Tuesday. I will not be live tomorrow. I'm having the final thing done with this tooth, and they're going to wrap that up tomorrow, and I'm so glad. And we'll be done with that. So I'm looking forward to having that behind me, but I have to do that tomorrow morning, same time I normally go live.